Hey, Miguel Iturrate back here on the CRP, and we've got a long one on the way. CRP 81 MMA news. I am joined by my partner, Devin Miller, and we're going to do it all. We're going to recap UFC 236 from last weekend. We're going to look forward to UFC St. Petersburg this coming weekend. We're going to look at a couple of the fights that were made in the UFC and Bellator as well. So we got a full agenda. Dev, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Miguel. Yeah, we were definitely gifted a fantastic card over the weekend. Two great main events, two classic title fights, interim title fights. I think that the Gastelum Adesanya fight for sure is one for the ages, one for the history books. Just really thrilling fight. Both guys knocked down in the fight. Both guys had to really dig deep and show a lot of heart, show great chin, pulled together a lot of techniques, and I thought it was a really good coming out performance for Israel Adesanya as a true megastar of the sport. He was really faced with a lot of adversity from Kelvin Gastelum. He was knocked down early in the first round, rattled a little bit, had to recover from that, had to make adjustments mid-fight, took him a while to get his range, threw a lot of awesome techniques in the fight, got cracked several times, actually got rocked in the fourth round, got rattled with a head kick, and looked to be on kind of wobbly legs. Gastelum failed to put him away in it, and then in the fifth round, when we all had it going 2-2. It was 2-2 going into that fifth round. He really dig deep and arguably definitely got at least a 10-8 round, if not a 10-7 round. Dropped him three times, almost finished him, and really showed the heart of a champion. Pulled it together in the championship rounds when it mattered. It was a really great fight. Both of them showed a lot of heart. Gastelum's got an incredible chin. It has a missile of a left hand, and it was a great fight to watch, and I said going beforehand that that the fans were going to win, and Holloway and Poirier, and we won in both fights because this was not a tactical Adesanya just picking Gastelum apart at range like I thought it might end up being. This was a fight where Gastelum was in there making the fight tough, pushing Adesanya back, and Adesanya had to really adjust and had to really fight hard to keep Gastelum from cracking him. So this was just an excellent fight on both ends, and neither one of their stocks go down in a type of fight like this.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Adesanya, obviously now the interim champion, he gets to look at the reunification of the belts there with Whitaker that hopefully comes before the end of the year. A lot of people are going to be talking about that. I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about where and how that fight could go down. But what I want to take a minute to do is a little shout out to Kelvin Gastelum too, just because of the way he fought. 2-2. I'm worried, he took a physical pounding in the fight, obviously, and obviously, maybe a 10-7 round in the last round. So he was getting beat up. But I'm more worried about him emotionally because I know, we know covering him over the last, little bit of time, how much he put into this fight, how much he wanted to be the champion. And the bottom line is to lose it like that, it had to be 2-2 going into that final round. And he had to feel pretty good about what he had been getting done and stuff like that. And obviously you're tired at that point and emotional and stuff. But at the end of the day, what Adesanya was able to do is after going through a 2-2 four-round set, so to speak, he didn't leave any questions. He answered the questions, and he made sure Gastelum knew that he didn't win that fight after that fifth round. And that had to be heartbreaking to Gastelum. It's the shout-outs for him, but also answered a lot of questions about Adesanya because not a lot of champions only champions really close fights like that. You know what I mean? A lot of guys – let it slow down, let them get off the hook or, whatever. But what we had there was a special performance on both parts. I think that's what you got there.
Yeah, like I said, neither one of their stocks are going to go down on this fight. That is one thing I just love about combat sports is that every fight matters tremendously. I mean, moving forward, I mean, it changed every fight, every performance is going to change the trajectory of your career. I mean, it's like every fight's a fork in the road. You're going to go one direction or you're going to go the other way. You're either moving backwards or you're moving forward. Both of them moved forward in this fight, but as you said, it hurts to come that close to a world title where you're inches away. You're maybe one round away from it. And he even had Adesanya hurt a couple times. And you're in this great war, and then to go through a war like that, to take all that damage, and then to fall short and not even go home with the belt. I mean, it's easy for Adesanya to make memes about, I thought I was cute. I thought I was ugly until I fought Kelvin Gastelum, and that was his way of showing respect and throwing a nod at Kelvin Gastelum. But it's easy for him to make those memes and show off his fat lip and stuff when he walked away from the belt with the belt, And it's not so easy when you're Kelvin Gastelum and you're in that position and you came up on the losing end, you fell a little bit short, and that's what happened. I mean, going into that fifth round, it was anybody's fight, and he fell short. And Adesanya put it on him in that fifth round and answered a lot of questions that I had, and I think that a lot of others had, about how is he going to perform under adversity, how is he going to deal with somebody who's trying to grapple him, because Kelvin Gastelum isn't a big middleweight. He's not a big guy he's not a Chris Weidman level wrestler or a Jacare Souza level grappler. But he's a good wrestler, and he tried to take this fight to the ground a few times, and Adesanya stuffed it well. The one time he did get taken down, he popped right back up. He was circling off the clinch very well, and he did a great job of, as I mentioned going beforehand, of keeping range. He that spinning elbow in the second round was nice. He dropped him with a right hand. He was countering him with right hands all night long, with lead right hands. He was landing. He looked sharp and like a sniper. And, Kelvin Gastelum's chin's amazing, and obviously that was one question going forward is, does Adesanya just not have enough power to finish it, or does Gastelum just have that good of a chin? And just judging on how Gastelum's head being knocked back, I think he just has a really good chin. I think he's just tough. I don't think we should take that away from him. I think that Adesanya would have probably got a lesser man out of there sooner. And so props to Kelvin Gastelum, and I actually would like to see him try to go back down, get a good nutrition coach, and try to make it back down to welterweight, because I think he could be world champion there.
Very very interesting stuff there. Yeah, one disservice I think Dana White did Adesanya there is bringing John Jones up as a potential opponent. I don't think that's something I want to see. It, people are comparing it to a bully in the schoolyard, it looks like a big brother beating up a little brother kind of thing. Adesanya is not there yet. Jones is heading to heavyweight, and Adesanya, I think somebody mentioned he weighed 183 pounds for this fight, so he's not a huge middleweight. So it just looks like a disparate fight, and I don't think he's doing him any favors. I do think the Whitaker fight has the potential to be big. What do you think?
I think the Whitaker fights, some are saying that that's going to be the biggest fight in Oceania history, and I know there's been big fights. Just a few years ago, you reminded me off air about Pacquiao and Horn, and other fights with Pacquiao, and the amount of knowledge and of history in your brain is pretty crazy. You cited Jack Johnson winning a world title in Australia over 100 years ago. Something I didn't know, but I do know that they are probably going to be looking at a stadium fight. I would suspect this year, but I think that they're going to have to be looking for a venue. They're going to have to look for a date, and that's going to be a scramble, because that's going to be a huge fight. You got the New Zealand, Adesanya and his family immigrated to New Zealand early in life, and he grew up in New Zealand. And then you have the Aussie, born and raised Aussie, and the champion Robert Whitaker, and for them to unify that belt in Australia is gonna be massive, and I think it's gonna be the first stadium show that I can remember that the UFC's done, and I bet they sell it out, and it'll be a good showcase fight for both of them. And Adesanya, the UFC is going to be riding this Adesanya wave. We probably have. I know that you probably have been getting tired of me talking about Adesanya like I'm just dick riding him, but it's not really that. It's just I can see the trend that he was going to be the next groomed star at this division. Like I called it at the beginning of the year that I thought he'd end up being the fighter of the year. He was the breakout star of 2018. He shows up on the scene in February of 2018. He goes 4-0 in the UFC, becomes a household name. It's very clear the UFC's moving for him to be the next big star at middleweight. He gets Anderson Silva, which is clearly it was sold as kind of like a turning of the guard fight. He fights a lot like Anderson, like a young Anderson. And then you got him fighting for the interim belt with Kelvin Gastelum, and now this sets up a massive fight with Robert Whittaker, and they're already on Helwani's. They were already on Helwani's show this Monday with their own individual interview, jawing at each other. I mean, the hype's already started. And this not only is this great for Israel Adesanya that they're riding this wave, this is exactly what somebody like Robert Whittaker needs, who is a great champion, an amazing fighter. This man went 10 rounds with Robert Whittaker, with Yoel Romero, who is just a freak, and pulled off the decision win, even though the second round one was kind of controversial, but still he walked away with the W in both fights. And he needs a big dance partner that's going to pull a lot of attention, because Robert Whittaker's not really much for press. He's probably one of the more underappreciated and underknown champions the UFC has at this point. So somebody like Adesanya, I mean, this is Conor and Aldo all over again. I mean, Aldo was a great fighter, a great champion for so many years, but he was not the transcendent superstar that Conor McGregor was. Conor McGregor comes on the scene, and Jose Aldo is getting more attention as a champion than he had in his whole career. And that's exactly what this is going to be like for Robert Whittaker. And this is such a big opportunity for both of them. It's a big opportunity for Adesanya, who Chael Sonnen thinks without Conor McGregor around is now the biggest star, the biggest pay-per-view draw, the biggest star in the UFC, which, I mean, besides maybe John Jones, I mean, he's right there. And with a win over Robert Whittaker, becoming the middleweight champion probably will be. And so it's a huge opportunity for him to just become a straight mega star in the UFC. And it's a great opportunity for Robert Whittaker to dethrone the hype train and get the respect as champion of this division. And he's still a young, tough guy who could be a big draw moving forward. So this is going to be a huge fight. And I'm so happy it's happening with these two. I think they're both are well deserving of it, and I think that's bound to be another just classic fight. So I'm definitely looking forward to that.
Yep, and really fast, just, if anybody poo-poos the idea of a stadium in Australia or something like that, the history he covered is legit. A few years back, Jeff Horn and Manny Pacquiao filled up a stadium, and Jack Johnson's win of the heavyweight championship, the legendary first black heavyweight boxing world champion, that was an Australian win, and they filled up a stadium down there in 1908 for that fight. So the bottom line is the Aussies have always supported fights. There's something about it. It's part of their mystique and culture. They're a little more rugged than Americans. If you look at it in the population, I think they get more support per capita and stuff. So it isn't a pipe dream. Now let's go ahead and go to the other main event. To me, Holloway and Poirier gave us the fight of the night. Maybe it's because it came at the end of the night. Bottom line is there you're talking about, we got two main courses, really. How can you argue against either fight here? In this case, I think, Gastelum maybe do some time off and hopefully get some rest. Holloway, I'm not sure if time off is the right way for him to go, but he may have to be heading back down to 145 because it looked like he was undersized in this fight. It looked like maybe his power, he just didn't have the stopping power that he's shown that he had at 145. And, in a wave recently of guys that have been trying to move up in weight and been successful, especially if you cover in boxing, there have been a lot of guys who have said, okay, I'm not going to do the hideous weight cut anymore. And in the UFC as well, I'm not going to do the big weight cuts anymore. I'm going to go up a weight class from where I've been competing before. And they've had so much success, I think, that people expected out of Holloway. But I think maybe we found a roof there. Holloway, if he doesn't go to 145 at 155, just engaging in him would be just a the crowd pleaser that could be any of these other fights for fight of the year, right? But at the same time, there are also other fights for him at 155 there that I think that you may have a ceiling there. And for example, unfortunately with Max and the way he fights and stuff, the fact is he doesn't scare Khabib. That's kind of Khabib's style itself. You know what I mean? The high pressure style, and Khabib's just much bigger and stronger. He can't scare Khabib. Poirier might be more of a threat to Khabib, but there was nothing about Holloway that threatened him, especially after Saturday's performance where you saw him at 155. That's what worries me there. If he's going to be operate at not a championship level, he might as well go back to 145 and give the championship title there. A thorough set of defense against a bunch of up and coming guys.
Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of names down at 145 pounds right now. I mean, you got new contenders coming up like Alexander Volkanovski, who's getting ready to fight the longtime champion Jose Aldo, who's, on a career resurgence since he lost that second fight to Max Holloway. And you've got, of course, names like Zabit Magomedsharipov, and you've still got Brian Ortega, who did take that first loss, but he's still a young talent. And Yair Rodriguez is in the mix there. And then you got old vets that Holloway hasn't fought yet, like Frankie Edgar. So, I mean, that division still has, it's not dead in the water yet. I mean, there's still obviously some emerging talent that's coming up right now. And we've seen this, we've seen it in the past where, somebody's struggling to make weight, and we've heard the rumors of Holloway training north of 180 pounds and him really having quite the cut to make it down to 145 pounds. So the logic is just, well, move up. It's time to move up. Well, that didn't turn out well for him this time because he did look thin in this division. He didn't. I'm sure that the weight, he seemed happier on, through the week, not having to cut that grueling last 10 pounds. But when he gets in there with Poirier, Poirier looked like a much bigger 55er. Poirier looked much more filled out, and Holloway fought valiantly. I mean, he fought his way back into the fight in that third round, and Poirier even was honest and stated in the post-fight wrap-up on ESPN that he felt the fight getting away from him. And that's when he dug deep, which, just a little side note real quick about Poirier, and I'm going to get back to this, about that was a big criticism of Poirier in the past, is that he chokes in big fights and that he fades. And no one can say that anymore about Dustin Poirier. So we'll get to Dustin Poirier because there's a lot that I hope he finally won his respect and gets the credit that he deserves as an elite level competitor. But Max Holloway did look small at this division, which was surprising, I thought. And when we analyze his style, is he going to be somebody that we want to see? I mean, of course he's gonna hang tough with all these guys, and I think that he can get better for sure. I think he'd hang tough with Tony Ferguson. I think he'd hang tough in a rematch with Conor McGregor. I think he'd hang tough in a third fight with Dustin Poirier, which probably won't happen. I think he'd hang.
Fabio Maldonado hung tough with people.
Exactly, and I think he'd hang tough with somebody like Justin Gaethje. But does he have the power to get these guys out of there at 155 pounds? And Max might be the greatest featherweight in the history of the UFC, history of MMA, when you consider that he beat and finished Jose Aldo twice. And he had a 13-fight winning streak going on in that division. And he's got a lot left that he can still go down there and do, I think. So Max is, as you said, still one of the pound-for-pound best fighters in the world. And he still has a home down there as champion of that division. He is, without a doubt, bar none, the champion, best 145er in the world at this moment. And, I think he's got a tough – I think he can make that division for a few more years. I mean, he's going to get bigger as he gets older. He's even talked about fighting at welterweight someday. So he's got time to maybe take a year off and bulk up and get bigger and become a more natural lightweight in the future. But at this moment right now, that's not him. And I think he can go back down there and maybe fight a Volkanovski, fight a Zabit, and just make his stand as the great 45er of that division before he takes that time off to really do it right and bulk up. And before we move on to Dustin Poirier, I guess I'll pass it back to you just for a minute, just about Max Holloway going forward. I will say this, and this needs to be said, and this is an outside the cage thing. Max Holloway might be the best loser in MMA. He handled himself with absolute class. He didn't lose a fan at all. He ended up donating his gloves to Dustin Poirier's charity. I shared a quote on Facebook from him talking about how, congrats to Dustin, him and Jolie, who is Dustin's wife, who's, I guess this woman was there for him before he was even in the UFC and was pushing him and motivated him, always believed in him. He was like, you guys should have had a belt years ago. And then he said he quoted an old Kanye West song by saying diamonds are forever.
God,
talking about,
young.
what?
That's cute. You're very, very young.
Yeah.
What I'm going to say, this is also outside the cage stuff, because Diamonds Are Forever is a James Bond movie, man.
Well, I know.
What hit me, I felt really old because some rapper named Nipsey Hussle got killed, and I'm not a rapper guy. But I remember Nipsey Russell. I remember where his name is ripped off from. I know he must have done it as a tribute because it wasn't disrespectful, but it was a black actor from previous to my generation. My grandparents used to like Nipsey Russell, and but there were people who didn't know that the name was a play on that stuff. So yeah, you just made me feel real old. But let's go ahead to Dustin. I agree with you. He deserves all the credit that he should get, because a 5-round fight is, I think the UFC distinguishes itself from boxing a little bit because, when you get to the championship rounds in 12 rounds, they'd already been to 15 rounds and they knocked it back down to 12. And somewhere in there, I don't know if boxing lost something, but in the UFC, the 5-round fights, and when you get 5-round fights like we did this weekend, you do get that sense of them leaving it all in the ring. Did you have that feeling of watching Dustin and watching Max after that fight, just after they delivered that? And you could have felt whoever won, but after what you just saw, did you have that feeling after Mayweather and Pacquiao?
Because, absolutely not. In fact, I had the feeling
they didn't give their all, and these guys, they did give their all. Poirier, like you said, people have knocked him in the past, or I thought that's where the one question here is going to be is, Poirier's been chinny before, he's been dropped, and Max couldn't do it. Is that a circumstance of yesterday? Did it just happen to be? Is it a testament to Max's power? Is it a testament to the fact that, Poirier at 155 maybe won't be as chinny anymore, without the cut and stuff like that? Poirier, if I remember in the post-fight talk, he said he's close to struggling to get to 155 nowadays. So you're right. He's right at the top of being a big lightweight right now. And I think he's right. I think hopefully Dana gets his plan and his wish there, and they wake up Khabib. Khabib could stop, hopefully, trying to get the UFC to back off and stuff. And he doesn't have to sit till November. So hopefully we get that in September.
Well, the plan is Khabib in September, and the rumor is Dubai, and or Abu Dhabi, or where. I'm still not convinced it's going to be Dustin Poirier. I think Dustin Poirier just walked into a Conor McGregor rematch. Is what I think. I could end up being wrong. I think we're going to see Tony Ferguson and Khabib, but we'll get to that.
There was a tweet today from Dana White that poo-pooed Tony Ferguson's comeback. He said that he was going to have to be cleared by UFC doctors, and I would assume with some of the problems that we've had that that'll also be psychologists, or at least some type of mental health kind of experts and stuff. If he was seeing implants in his leg and people in walls and stuff at some point, maybe he was joking around. Maybe he had a bad mushroom trip or something like that. I mean, I heard that, that it might have been drugs and stuff. I don't know Tony Ferguson or anything like that, but, maybe there's a good explanation. He'll be cleared to fight, but he's not cleared to fight right now. I know he was out there challenging and saying he's fine and he's doing good, but Dana White just poo-pooed that this evening. I don't know if you caught that.
I didn't, and That's discouraging if it did, because we've talked about that with Tony Ferguson. I mean, it's time to get out. Like, I mean, that style isn't going to do well around 40 years old. I mean, he this is his prime. This is when he's at his best. He's on this huge win streak, and it just seems weird with Poirier now being talked about with the title fight when you've got this guy who's got an 11 fight win streak. But if Poirier goes and unifies that belt in September with Khabib, I'm happy for him, and I think his back's against the wall, just like it is with anybody that's going to fight Khabib, just because of what Khabib does so well. But one thing we will say, this is just to echo the words of Daniel Cormier during that fight, that Dustin Poirier is a phenomenal boxer. I mean, his guard was high, the way he was rolling punches, the power that he has in his hands, the way he was mixing it up, how comfortable he looks on the feet now. And we brought up, like, you know, the past criticism of Dustin Poirier is that he fades and that he's chinny. Well, I mean, he hung in there for 3 tough back and forth rounds with Justin Gaethje, and then knocked him out in the 4th round. He hung in there twice, tough, with Eddie Alvarez. And the first fight, he was clearly had Eddie on the ropes. Eddie got disqualified and it ended in no contest. And then in the second fight, he knocks him out in the 2nd round. And before that, he was outgunning and outworking Anthony Pettis, who just knocked out Wonder Boy at welterweight. Dustin Poirier is in the prime of his career and has hit his stride and has continually improved. He's clearly just buckled down and decided, you know, I am going to be a world champion level fighter. And, you know, I'm proud of somebody like him. I mean, it's really cool to see somebody like him come back from adversity and find his stride and keep working and keep grinding to get better. And, you know, if he gets to fight Khabib, you know, I think that's awesome. And I look forward to that fight. I think that he is going to hang tough if they do fight. It's just, you know, he better be working on his wrestling. Because Khabib's coming to put him on his back and punish him. And
Yep.
And another thing, I mean, we've been talking about all the chaos surrounding Conor McGregor and how it's just a freak show constantly. One thing, this great fight, and which, by the way, this fight, you know, you were talking about, you know, it was your fight of the night. Dude, we were exhausted here after the Adesanya Gastelum fight. It was like, man, we got Poirier and Holloway next after that. Like, and then it turned out to be just an absolute legendary fight. So, I mean, yeah, it was just a crazy 10 rounds of action that we saw last Saturday, and you know ESPN's happy with the outcome of that on their very first pay-per-view. I mean, it was great to watch. But
well, that's our wrap up of UFC 236. Let's go ahead and turn on agenda item number 2, which is looking at the UFC St Petresburg's main event here. Obviously, we've got Alexey Oleinik taking on Alistair Overeem this coming weekend in Russia. What are your thoughts on this show? A little bit of a down show. It's being called UFC Fight Night 149. It's also being called UFC on ESPN plus 7 on ESPN plus 7, etc., etc. Overeem, Oleinik. Not exactly a battle of number 1 contenders, but they're both top 10, I'd figure.
yeah, what are the odds on this currently, Miguel?
Right now, Overeem is going to be favored. Let me just make sure I pull up the right number on here. But Overeem coming in with the UFC on ESPN undercard odds, main card odds here. Let me pull it up for you and give you the exact figures so that we're not all messed up here. And we've got Alistair minus 250, Oleinik plus 210.
Yeah, I think that those are good odds. The only thing with Overeem is he's pushing 40 years old. And when you talk about Overeem, you're talking about a inconsistent, up and down, controversy-riddled career of a man who, you know, started his career at light heavyweight and blew up to heavyweight, and was known as a Reuter for years. With just, you could just tell the difference in his physical stature, just becoming massive. But then he goes on to becoming just dominated outside the UFC for quite a many years, and ended up becoming the Strikeforce champion. Comes into the UFC and runs through Brock Lesnar, and then he's had some up and down since then. The thing with Overeem is how many times has he been knocked out? I swear, and I mean this sincerely. I'm not even just trying to be funny. I can't think of a fighter I've seen get knocked out more times than I have Alistair Overeem. I can think of several times I've seen Alistair Overeem knocked unconscious. And,
he's starting to remind people of David Price. David Price, a British boxer who's been knocked out like 4 or 5 times, and left twitching knockouts. So ugly knockouts on top of everything else too. Oleinik, 41, a veteran of like almost 80 fights. Once upon a time, back in 2006, I match-made a fight for him. So I've worked with Oleinik before, and I knew he was tough there. At that point, he wasn't fighting at his heavyweight division, and he took a loss in that fight. I matched him up with Chael Sonnen at that point. So a fight of 2 UFC veterans there. Oleinik, it doesn't surprise me that, 13 years later, he's still in the game. It doesn't surprise me that 13 years later, he's a guy with 70 fights. That was the kind of mindset that he had when he showed up there. That was obviously early in his MMA career. At least it was early in his international MMA career. He showed up every bit looking like he knew what he was doing in terms of competing and things like that. A Sambo specialist, has gotten some submission finishes in the UFC as well, if I'm not mistaken, since we've been watching him. In this particular fight, though, I think you're looking at Overeem has been to a higher level, been at a higher level, operated at a higher level for longer. You're talking about a long history and a lot of fights. That does say something. But you're talking about Overeem, you talked a little bit about his history with fighting, the likes of, Brock Lesnar and that sort of stuff. If I'm not mistaken, Overeem is the guy that back in the old days of Pride took out Chuck Liddell, didn't he?
He didn't say no. That was Rampage Jackson took him out.
Okay.
He got knocked out by Chuck Liddell. Nasty.
There you go.
Yeah,
Thank you for patching up my beat up memory there. But the point there is that's operating at a high level too. You know what I mean? With Pride and stuff like that, that's a higher level than Oleinik has been to throughout his whole career for that long. So that's mainly Overeem's advantage. The fact that it's in Russia also gets a little bit of a wipeout because Overeem throughout his whole career, him being Dutch, has always had an association and help from the Russian Red Devils, including training at times and things. It's not outside the realm of possibility that him and Oleinik have rolled around before.
Yeah, and this isn't the type of fight that I usually see. I'm not as worried about Alistair Overeem as I am against a heavy-handed striker. And I think that Oleinik is going to be a little too slow. Alistair, the thing is, as many times he's been knocked out, he doesn't look like he wants to fade or nothing. He's still the same fighter. He's still really good offensively. He's got, Alistair Overeem might be the most technically skilled heavyweight, one of the most technically skilled heavyweights we've ever seen. It's just he's very, very, very chinny. You talked about his days in Pride. When I think back at him at light heavyweight, I think of him getting knocked cold by not only Chuck Liddell, but Shogun twice, Ricardo Arona. I remember knocked him out. I remember him getting knocked out in K1 by Sergey Karatanov. And since he's been in the UFC, he's been knocked out by Bigfoot Silva, Travis Brown, Ben Rothwell, Stipe, Ngannou, and Curtis Blades. And the Ngannou knockout alone looked like it killed him. And, but yet he also has two wins over Fabricio Verdum. He had he knocked out Marquette. He knocked out Junior Dos Santos. He beat Roy Nelson. He knocked out Alistair Andre Arlovsky. He beat Frank Mir. He beat Brock Lesnar. He was the champion in Strikeforce. So, and he was also a K1 heavyweight champion. He was a great, great kickboxer. and he's got some submission skills. So I mean, he's definitely, I mean, a great fighter. He's just definitely with the chin issues, but I don't think that'll be a factor here with Oleinik. I think he's coming off a win. He just got a win over really a nobody in his last fight, somebody that we never even heard of. Overeem did. Before that, he was knocked out by Curtis Blades and Ngannou. And Oleinik is coming in on this fight on a 2-fight win streak over Mark Hunt and Junior Albini, and he lost to Curtis Blades. So both their last defeat was against Curtis Blades. As you mentioned, you got a 38-year-old, you got a 41-year-old. They're at the tail end of their career. I think that Oleinik, I will say this, I think his style and at this point in his career is better than what it is for his age, than what Overeem's is. But I see this as being a fight that Overeem should shine in and should still be able to be at his tail end of his career and pull together another win, most likely.
And that's the main event of this Saturday's UFC Fight Night 149, or the UFC on ESPN Plus 7. Alistair Overeem taking on Alexey Oleinik at heavyweight. And we talked a little bit about both men and the long histories. Both men actually well over 60 fights. And if you include Overeem's kickboxing career, they're both well over 70 fights on their career. How far you want to go on this card? With all the Russian talent and stuff, you want to save it for the wage rage later on in the week, or you want to talk about the co-feature here?
Well, I think that two things to note. We got the return of Islam Makhachev, who is a very, very tough fighter, Khabib's teammate, only 27 years old. And he hasn't fought since last July when he finished Cajun Johnson in the first round. And he's a legit guy who could shake up this division here at lightweight. He's very tough. Has a 5-1 UFC record. But the most notable thing about him on his return is it was basically his buddy Khabib saved his UFC career. The UFC was going to cut him after the big brawl, after the Khabib Conor fight, because Islam was one of the guys who came into the cage and attacked Conor McGregor. And that almost cost him his entire UFC career. And he didn't really seem to care. I mean, this is another one of them guys that's cut from that Dagestani, Chechnyan area of the Caucasus that we've talked about so much about when it comes to Khabib and Conor, where he's cut from that cloth. This is
they've got their identity pretty set, and part of it, of the fighting thing, this is sport to them, and usually the fighting that they've been surrounded with involves life and death situations. So you're in a situation where mindset wise, now here they're not doing him a great deal of favors. They're putting him in against Northern Russian or Arman Sarukyan, maybe not from the north of Russia, but he lists Khabarovsk, Russia as his home. He's 13-1, and he's just 22 years old. But this is his UFC debut. Tellingly, though, we're at lightweight here. Now, Junior Asuncion is a guy who operates at 135 pounds in the UFC and is a top gun who just lost a world title shot. But in this case, Sarukyan has a May of 2018 win over Junior Asuncion at 155. Asuncion earlier in his career has a win over George Masvidal at 155. Asuncion at 135 or 155 is a tough guy, but that's about the only known quantity we have on this UFC debutante's resume. What more have you been able to dig up on him?
Not much, to be honest. I mean, these are one of those cards, Miguel, that sometimes I feel like we kind of just overlook because the names aren't too easy to just roll off the tongue for American audiences, and but at the same time, when you examine this culture, these are cards to definitely pay attention to because I mean, just like we were just talking about with this culture, is these guys, this culture produces some hard-nosed, tough individuals. And I do know a little bit about this Sergey Pavlovich guy that's fighting at heavyweight, and he's a beast. Could be a future contender at heavyweight. And obviously, we do got to throw a little bit toward Shevchenko's little sister, who is fighting here, and she came from the Contender Series and already has another win. She's undefeated right now. I don't like that she's in the same weight class as her sister though, because I'm pretty sure she's also older than her sister, who's the champion. So she's kind of like the knockoff version of her sister, but she's she's still a solid fighter, and she's very pretty. And she's returning into the octagon against Roxanne Modafferi, who I don't know what the odds are showing on that fight, but I might call the upset there if Roxanne is the underdog here. It just, I don't know. I've seen them both fight, and
yep. Roxanne's the underdog for sure, and I know Roxanne pretty well actually. She started out her career. She fought for me on several occasions. I've actually been to her apartment in Tokyo. So she dedicated her life, to fighting and moved to Japan. She's kind of got totally unique personality for the sport and very likable. Don't let that fool you though. But when she comes in, and if she can get her game off, she can be very sneaky. Back in the old days, and Roxy goes back a long way. But back in the old days, when the women were coming up, there was a dominant girl named Jennifer Howe. Jennifer Howe actually was dating Jeremy Horn at the time. And it gives you an idea of, where she was getting her knowledge from, and she knew how to fight. And Modafferi beat her, and if I'm not mistaken, Monty Cox was managing Jennifer at the time, and Monty heavily pushed for a rematch. I'm going to just double check some of my facts here too, just to make sure I'm not making shit up. But he heavily pushed for a rematch because Howe had been undefeated and was generally considered the best woman in the States, at least, and that sort of stuff. So so Modafferi and her got together again, and Modafferi beat her again. And at that point, I remember Monty telling me, he goes, Jennifer could never beat her because, after she put her in the triangles, he took her out by decision in the 3-round fight the first time, and then triangled her and beat her the second time. And she took out the dominant girl that time. Howe fought only one more time after that. And, we're talking about those fights date back to 2004, 2005. So Roxanne has been around the block. That's, 15 years worth of fighting where she's just been dedicated to this. So, yeah, she's dangerous. The only problem with Roxanne is that she's not a physical, she's a cerebral fighter. She's a technique fighter, but, she's not a person blessed with a huge amount of athleticism. She does it, based on guts and love of the sport. And, in the UFC, missing athleticism sometimes is just too huge a hole to overcome, and I think that's what makes the odds in this fight.
Yeah, and just kind of wrapping up the preview. There's not a whole lot to talk about here, but with with this card, I mean, this is just this is one of these cards that the names might not. A lot of the names on this card might not be too familiar to us, so it could be one of those cards that we kind of want to sleep on, but. A lot of these foreign talents that's coming up, like one of the guys I do see on here that I remember is this Michael Oleksiejczuk, who's fighting Gadzu Murad Antigolov, and I mean these names are hard to pronounce for the American audience pronouncing these in English, but I remember he dropped Michael Oleksiejczuk, only 24 years old. Undefeated inside the octagon, dropped John Vellante with a beautiful body hook, and I actually covered that on one of my CRP minutes not long ago. I mean, just timed the body hook shots to the liver beautifully, and he's fighting on this card. And he's a tough young light heavyweight, and so I mean, oftentimes it's these cards where there's some emerging talent that's developing there that we don't know, that we overlook. We don't know the name. It's a foreign name, long, hard to pronounce name. But these are the cards that typically turn out to be really good fights. And when you dig a little bit deeper, you're seeing a lot of young guys and a lot of guys with really good records. And these are going to be wars. And as I mentioned, over there in Russia and that part of the world right now, they're just breeding out a different breed of animal men over there that are fighting right now. I mean, and it's I there's no toxic masculinity being in the news over there in that part of the world right now. So I think that this will probably be a fun card to turn into, to see some high level fights and to see some guys that are really going to bring it to the table. And you know, before the wage rage, I'm going to dig a little bit deeper and look into these fights and find out a little bit more about some of these fighters.
All righty, then let's go ahead and skip over to a fight that got announced last week that I want to cover with you, and we're talking about one of the co-features on the UFC's ESPN4 issue. That fight card is set for June 29th at the Target Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and obviously I'm talking about Joseph Benavidez and Jussier da Silva, Jussier Formiga. Formiga coming off a good performance here. He gets his rematch with Benavidez. How do you see this second fight going?
Well, this is a rematch, and Benavidez is somebody that has been underrated for a long time. I mean, he lost recently back in last June on the undercard of the Whitaker Romero fight. He lost a decision to Sergio Pettis. He got knocked out by Demetrius Johnson in a title fight in the rematch of those two back in 2013. Before that, he lost in 2012 a split decision to Mighty Mouse. But those are the only three fights he's lost this decade, and he's got just an absolutely stellar UFC record. He has been a top 5 flyweight basically since we've known about a flyweight division in MMA, and he does hold a win over Formiga, and dating back to 2013. But Formiga's really come a long way. Formiga's on a 4-fight win streak. He's definitely probably earned himself the spot as number one contender, seeing that there was kind of a progression of Benavidez losing to Pettis and then Pettis losing to Formiga. So this is really a high-level fight at this division, probably the number one contender fight at this division. And the fact that they keep putting on these high-level fights shows that they might not be just so dead set on doing away with this flyweight division as we had originally thought. But at the same time, we get mixed signals because Cejudo's going up to 135 to fight Marlon Moraes in June. So I think that this fight is actually after that. So we'll actually have a little bit more answers about what the significance of this means, because I think if Moraes beats Cejudo, I think Cejudo will go back down to 25, especially if it's a pretty decisive win. If Cejudo wins, I don't know. I don't know what happens with this division after that, and I don't think that Cejudo's going to give up the belt and this is going to be turned into a title fight, although that'd be the right thing to do, I think, if he were to win. And that could make this fight really significant. But I'll say this: if Cejudo wins and he doesn't plan on going back to 25, even if they keep this division, and they don't turn it into a title fight, it still might as well be a title fight, because these are the two top flyweights right now outside of Cejudo. Now that Mighty Mouse is not in the UFC.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you are getting mixed signals from the UFC about the 125-pound division. There's been talk about sunsetting it, but not really a lot directly from the UFC. It's just been a lot of speculation and stuff. And I'm going to go on a limb and say that the division will probably stick around. Now, they may have some time, there won't be at the very least, this has interim title fight written all over it, right? They've done interim title fights in other divisions. Why not here? But they're not doing it. So we may see judo move on. That title could even sit vacant for a little while. I don't think they get rid of it. I think there are a couple of competitors, Benavidez being one, Sergio Pettis being another, that just 135 does not suit them. It's not good for them. So you have to keep another the other weight class. Now, here's the main reason why it won't go away. Demetrius is gone. And, with all due respect to Demetrius, because Demetrius was the best fighter on the planet, for his run there, but he was also a little bit of a difficult champion. His management and the UFC never saw eye to eye. He's managed by a guy who's the matchmaker of ONE FC, who at the end of the day, the UFC may at some point see as a competitor. I think they look at everybody as a competitor, right? ONE's a big company operating in Asia, and Matt Hume is their president in charge of operations, and he's their manager. And guess what? Demetrius Johnson is over there now. But Matt's never been that easy for the UFC to deal with. And Matt's always been a guy who felt Demetrius is underpaid. And then that becomes more aggravated when you got a guy on a 12-fight winning streak, and you're like, hey, where's my pay-per-view share? Where's my this, that, and the other thing? The UFC's not ready to do that. Now, with him gone, you don't got anybody there bitching about money. You got now you got people scared, and you got people happy about the contract they have. So why get rid of it? It's not even that difficult management anymore.
I think the big issue that the UFC's having with it is just the star power is just not there right now, and I think that can change. And I don't think that they have to necessarily make this division a headliner division either. I don't understand that. I mean, all these different cards on. I mean, we've got Alexey Oleinik and Alistair Overeem fighting for the main event of this weekend's card, and they couldn't make a Jussier Formiga and Joseph Benavidez flyweight title fight for the main event of some of these fight you have ESPN Plus fight night cards. I mean, I mean, is it really that difficult? I mean, and are you trying to tell me over in the span of 3, 4, 5 years that they're not going to develop some kind of attention on somebody? That somebody's not going to pick up steam and become a star somehow? I think that just dropping the whole division just because they don't have a 500,000 pay-per-view by star right now is just kind of foolish, and I don't.
It happens in boxing as well. The best fights are in the lower weight classes. The most talented and varying sets of techniques come from the lower weight classes. When was the last time, you can't picture, there's no heavyweights trying, flying arm bars and shit like that. Not that you see that much of that stuff anymore, but the capability, the type of flexibility and things you see in the lower weight classes are there. That's what you have to focus on. The problem with Demetrius Johnson is I'm an average sized dude, and Demetrius Johnson's up to here on me. You know what I mean? And, Dana's a little bit bigger dude. It's just not impressive anymore, and that becomes hard to market. They like to bring in models and girls and stuff. So you got these girls in high heels, and now you got women towering over your UFC champion. You know what I mean? It's the same thing with Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez in boxing and stuff like that. And there is a little bit of an aspect of hard to market, To me, you can manage some of that in the modern era with cameras and things that are done correctly, and you just have to be sharp and not bring in 6-foot models when the fucking main event is a flyweight. You know what I mean? But so there are other ways of marketing. To me, John Dodson was a marketable athlete. You know what I mean? Demetrius in his excellence was a marketable athlete, but they don't market people that way. They want to market, white trash Ronda and that sort of stuff. Rather than excellence like DJ. So my argument is that because DJ's gone, the flyweight division went back to being low maintenance. So because of that, I'm not sure that it'll go away, but it'll probably still be for the foreseeable future what it is now, which is a division that they don't pay a lot of attention to. But I think that the headache is gone, so therefore some of the risk is gone. Remember, at the end of the day, the only time they've done this was in the past. They sunset the lightweight division. That was over negotiation issues and problems with Jens Pulver, who was the champion. And BJ Penn was involved, I think, in that set where, BJ maybe had won the championship or was in the mix with Jens Pulver. But anyway, both guys, BJ and Jens Pulver, wanted more money. So the UFC said, guess what? We're not doing the weight class anymore. So that's the precedent. That's why they sunset weight classes when the business end doesn't add up for them. That's all.
Well, you brought up John Dodson, and you know, that was what Demetrius Johnson needed during that dominant reign. Was he needed a good foe, and he had it there for a second with Dodson, but he got through both those fights pretty convincingly, and then he really had it there with the rematch with Henry Cejudo. And after Cejudo beat him, I thought that division was definitely had themselves a rivalry right now and had the potential for a very big rubber match. But then, next thing you know, TJ Dillashaw's going down there to fight Cejudo, and Mighty Mouse is leaving the UFC. And now they're left kind of in this position now. But that. I think going forward, they should keep the division. They should just put it on smaller shows or put it on as a co-main event feature for a pay-per-view or something. And they're going to end up having a champion, whether it's Cejudo going back. If Cejudo goes back down there, they got themselves a marketable champion still. I mean, Cejudo is just gold with the media. I mean, he's great. He sells fights. He's perfect. Even if Cejudo does go up and they're left championless, somebody, let's say Formiga becomes a champion. Well, then they have Formiga or they have Benavidez. Well, somebody along the line is going to come along and they're going to become a decent champion that's defending the belt. They're going to get some attention, and then once they start getting a big rivalry going together, the division's going to have some steam, and people are going to look at there. And as long as they put their fights on key cards in key positions and people see these fights and know these personalities, it'll get some steam over time. Throwing the whole division away just because it's not at its best right now and doesn't have the star power that they would like to sell pay-per-views is just, I think, just kind of silly and short-sighted. And I think that this is the division. They love belts so much. They love belt fights so much that they'll make interim belts at the drop of a hat at any time. But they are hesitating creating a new 65-pound division and want to cut the 25. I mean, how that makes sense, I don't even know. They want to make an interim title fight for every division, but they want to cut a division and don't want to add a new one when it's clearly needed. So they're just inconsistent with the way they think. It's very obvious.
It's an ego thinking in there. So all right, so we've got Formiga and Benavidez set for end of June, and hopefully that is the extension of the flyweights. And we're going to go to the last subject that we've got on the agenda today, and we're going to take a look at the Bellator offering. They've just signed Chael Sonnen and Lyoto Machida, and I'm sorry if I messed up some of the titles there. It's our first time messing with the program, but we're looking at Bellator here to close out. Lyoto versus Chael, Miguel's Geriatric League in action here. How you feel about this one?
Well, it's more. This is what Bellator does, isn't it? It's the old UFC stars, they go to Bellator and they fight each other. It's you call it the Geriatric League. It's the old guys who no longer are relevant in the UFC, so they go to Bellator League. Geriatric League simplifies it, but that's what one championship's making moves, and you got articles in Forbes talking about this East-West duopoly in mixed martial arts between the UFC and one championship, and they're getting guys like Demetrius Johnson, and they got guys beating Eddie Alvarez, and they're marketing their champions. They're selling out big stadiums, they're big arenas, and they're promoting themselves well. And here you got Bellator trying to compete with the UFC in their home turf in the UFC in the United States. They go to New York City here in June, and they're just. I don't like this business model. They're going to be at Madison Square Garden, and so what's the thing? Oh, well, we need big names, so let's put Lyoto Machida and Chael Sonnen together. Well, I mean, this isn't 2011. Like, that would have been a big fight 8-9 years ago. It's just not what it is anymore. And of course, I'm still interested. I mean, but Chael Sonnen has clearly moved on with his career. He's clearly taken these fights kind of almost as gimmicks at this point. I mean, he just got ran through by an old Fedor who didn't make it a minute with Ryan Bader. And, Machida, I can't even really think of what – I mean, I know he's been in Bellator, but,
he got one fight in under Bellator, and he's got a win. It's over Rafael Carvalho. He was on a 2-fight losing streak with the UFC heading out of that. And that's the part of it I don't like. It's like um, some of these guys know their names and they're former champions, and that's what Bellator looks like. When you look at it, and I apologize. He had a 2-fight winning streak in the UFC, beating Belfort and Anders. And before that, he had dropped 3 in a row, so he was 2-3 in his last 5. And just that's what you kind of remember him going out and his failed run at 205 after I'm sorry, his failed run dropping at 185 after having the light heavyweight championship for a little bit. Lyoto was once one of the best fighters on the planet. He's clearly not anymore. And Bellator is grabbing the scraps in this case. They've done a good job in grabbing a couple of the elite fighters that the UFC has let go, but the UFC hasn't let too many elite guys go at the point where they're still useful fighters. And they haven't done actually that great a job with guys like Benson Henderson and things like that. Rory McDonald at this point has one of their belts. Gegard Mousasi, has another one of their belts. Those are UFC guys that left the UFC in their prime and are still capable fighters. But most of the roster, Quentin, Vanderlei, Chael, Lyoto, Fedor, most of the roster that's in the geriatric league is, plus 40 guys that, haven't given us, as you said, a highlight fight, in more than half a decade. So, and this is up there with that, I don't blame Machida and I don't blame Sonnen for grabbing it. Like you said, Sonnen's got a lot of business and other stuff going on, being a personality and the bad guy and stuff like that. Machida, he needs the fights. He doesn't have that. And, he still has his legacy. Maybe he's thinking about a run. I guess the fight's at middleweight. Are they going to do it at middleweight, light heavyweight? What do we know about Bellator? We know nothing. They don't tell us anything. So we'll just see them at Madison Square Garden. June 14th is the day of the fight. Any predictions on this one?
I just, from what I've seen of them recently, I think Machida will win. And just judging on the style, I don't think Chael's going to be able to really impose that style on a Lyoto Machida. But when you look at Chael Sonnen's last 5 fights, when you count this, he's going to get in the ring with Machida. He fought Tito Ortiz back in 2017. He fought Vanderlei Silva back in 2017. Fought Quentin Jackson and Fedor in 2018. Now he's about to fight Lyoto Machida. So Ortiz, Silva, Quentin Jackson, Fedor, and Machida. And Chael Sonnen versus all of them. None of these guys have been supremely relevant since 2012 at the latest. I mean, so what this makes and most of these fights have been main or co-main events on their cards. So it makes them look like they're just 10 years behind the UFC. They're getting the talent that was big in the UFC 10 years ago. And
yeah, what they run into here is there comes an aspect of these fighters are just, you're overpaying probably. And at this point, you have to overpay because veterans are not going to take pay cuts, unless they're really in a hurting circumstances for finances. Why take pay cuts and stuff and keep doing the grind and operating at a high level? So you come in, you take a contract, maybe it's less than you made for your biggest fights and stuff like that, but it's a reasonable contract over time. Now you got guys maybe not fighting for 100%, It's the Bob Sapp effect. How far off is Chael Sonnen from actually being Bob Sapp, showing up for a payday and leaving,
I mean, other than the fact that he's just a much higher level mixed martial artist, not far, because that's what it looks like. He's just still just taking fights just to take fights. And
Chael's never been a guy, if Chael gets caught, he'll tap out too. You know what I mean? I respect that. Live to fight another day and the whole thing, it's not a problem. But, again, we're going to be asked to watch this, and advertisers are going to be asked to pay for this. And they're going to take home pretty decent money for the fight. And we may get less than we got from Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, they're getting their money, and they're getting to go fight and not have to fight against some of these. I mean, maybe we're wrong for complaining about this. Maybe it's not BJ Penn being thrown in there with Yair Rodriguez. So maybe this is exactly what's right for both of these guys right now, is to be out of the UFC where they're not in contention to be a serious world championship contender, and they get to fight older guys from their generation. Maybe that's a great thing. I don't see what Bellator is gaining throwing throwing these out there because
It's cheap advertising. It's cheap advertising because of their name recognition. And here's the part of it is, to me, really, this is a young man's sport. So once older guys are doing it, there is a taking away of it. In jiu-jitsu, there are masters classes and masters belts and competitions and things like that. But I think there comes a point where, guys go to the masters because they can't cut it against the younger guys anymore. And so it's a natural progression. But the fact is with the name recognition, you're evoking a certain level of fighter that these guys are not anymore. But by putting them in the main event and by giving them the paycheck and giving them the bells and whistles, you're still presenting them that way. So if they came out and said, we're going to do a heavyweight Masters Grand Prix and just called it what it is, over 35ers, they would have gotten a lot more of my respect. But you can't you don't market that. You can't market it as the older guy. You know what I mean? It sounds weird, but that's literally what it was, and that would have been the honest way to market it, because you're not going to get the balls out fighting that you get from younger men. It's just not going to happen.
No, it's not, and it's just this might have worked like when Bellator was first coming in and establishing themselves. It's not working anymore. They're having a lot better success with MVP versus Daly, and trying to push this welterweight Grand Prix. That looks a lot better for Bellator than recycling these old talent that people are familiar with because of three letters UFC, not because of Bellator. They need organically grown talent. Michael Venom Page, if he can get through Douglas Lima and maybe beat Roy McDonald in that finale, if he makes it there and becomes a legit an undefeated welterweight champion in Bellator, and then they got Patricia Pitbull down there at featherweight. They've got Michael Chandler, and then they got Gegard Mousasi, who could be right in there with Adesanya or with Whitaker or with Gastelum easily. Great fighter. And then they got a two-division champion, Ryan Bader. Then they would be looking a little bit better. But but with this stuff, I don't feel like this does anything good for them moving forward with, if they ever really want to be a serious competitor in the States to the UFC. Because right now, notice when Forbes wrote that article about the duopoly in mixed martial arts worldwide, East versus West with ONE versus UFC, nothing was said in that article about Bellator. So,
and we saved them for last here on the CRP podcast. I'm Miguel Iturrate. That's Devin Miller. We are the MMA team. We've gone long here. We did a recap of UFC 236. We looked ahead to Overeem and Oleinik and the UFC St. Petresburg card. We talked about Jussier, Formiga, Joseph Benavidez, and the flyweight division, and we closed out with some Bellator talk and the announcement of Lyoto versus Chael for June. And unless you've got any closing remarks, we're going to close out the CRP. Dev, anything to close?
No, just it was a great week, and we got a little spoiled last week, and it was fun to recap all of that because those were great fights, and I'm glad I got to see them.
All right, and we are signing off here at the CRP. We'll be back with our picks. Dev warming up for later.